We don't really know what to want. We're creatures who are aiming for transcendence. We want to transcend ourselves. We're looking to grow and change. We're always going to be growing in one direction or the other. And so the question is, which direction are we going in?
Welcome to Forge the Man. Professional excellence meet vocational clarity through the intercession of Mary, Mother of fairest love, and the teachings of St. Jose Maria Escrivá. We help Catholic men sanctify their work and find their mission. The forge is hot and the hammer is ready. Let's get to work. Today I have a special guest. He is a scholar of René Girard, who manages Imitatio, a program devoted to Girard's thought. He has translated and edited books by Girard and written extensively on him. Trevor is also a novelist and has written 2 novels, minor Indignities in 2020 and the forthcoming The Comforts of Exile, should be out in September of 26. He is a co-producer of a documentary film, Things Hidden, the life and legacy of René Girard. For more than a decade, he has taught French language and literature at Caltech in Pasadena, California. He is currently translating a biography on René Girard for Stanford University Press. Trevor grew up in Maine. His parents were artists. They weren't Catholics, but they had many virtues. They homeschooled Trevor for a time, which in the 1980s in rural Maine was unusual. Trevor was a 2-time captain of his basketball team in high school and a top member of the chess team. He went to Yale and was an undergrad there, where he majored in literature and taught chess in the inner city schools. After living in France, he went to grad school at UCLA to study the work of the French Catholic theorist René Girard. There he met Carolyn, whom he has been married for 15 years. They both converted to Catholicism, Trevor in 2015, Carolyn in 2017. They have 4 children, ranging in ages from 10 down to 2. Trevor, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, today we're going to talk about a man that maybe some of you have not heard of. His name is René Girard. And there's no better to speak to this man than Trevor. So Trevor, first, for many people have not heard him, can you tell us a little bit about him and some of his major discoveries that would be of great value to our audience?
Sure. René Girard was a French theorist, literary critic, and anthropologist who was born in Avignon, France in 1923. And his father was the curator of the Pope's Castle in Avignon, which is the largest Gothic edifice in Europe, I'm told. Girard came to the United States after World War II, as many of his compatriots did at that time. And he ended up in Indiana, where he did a PhD in history and soon shifted his interests over to literature. And he embarked on this very distinguished academic career in the United States that took him from the University of Indiana to Johns Hopkins University and eventually by way of the University of Buffalo all the way out to Stanford, where he spent really the majority of his career and where he ended up living for the rest of his life. He died in 2015. He was a member of the French Academy, which is an institution in France that has 40 members. It's a body of researchers and intellectuals and writers who are responsible for overseeing the proper use of the French language, which is something that we don't do here in the United States, but in France, very concerned to keep out the business neologisms that we Americans like to import into the French language. So Girard was a member of that body, but those academic honors reflect his amazing achievements as a writer and an intellectual. He's most famous for having written 3 books. First book is a work of literary criticism published in 1961, translated under the title Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, which is a study of classic literature, classic novels, and really a study of the way that those writers understood the complexity of the relationships of the characters and the way that those relationships were governed by, really, if you like, the forces of sin understood by Christian doctrine. But Girard had this special angle on this, which he called triangular or mimetic desire. And this book made his reputation. He then published a second book called Violence and the Sacred in 1972, which was also very well received. And this was a study of ancient ritual and Greek tragedy. And what it posited was that the foundations of human culture are actually violent in nature, that we have this propensity to scapegoating that is reflected in our cultural forms and our institutions and in sacrificial rituals in primitive societies. So this is something of a dark book, as he himself would acknowledge, but this book was an important book in the field of anthropology, religious anthropology. And then Girard, when he'd been writing his first book, had actually converted or reverted to Catholicism in the course of writing that book really an astonishing way. And in his third book, he finally unveiled his Christian beliefs in a book called Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, which argued that the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Gospels are actually the source of all of the knowledge that Western societies have amassed and organized in the disciplines of the social sciences. So he argued for the Gospels, the Christian Gospels, being sort of the root of all of the great intellectual achievements of European thought, which is a very stunning argument. Moreover, he argued in that book that somehow Christianity has these insights into myth and ancient ritual that demonstrate that Christianity is in some sense true, epistemologically. That's a big word. Christianity sees the truth about human relationships and human nature in a way that primitive religions could not. So these were all very controversial ideas, and in particular, his third book was very controversial and resulted in his, you could say, losing some credit among academics, but the ideas were too powerful to ignore, and they really established Girard as a major thinker of the second half of the 20th century. I encountered him as a young student, having just graduated from college. I moved to France, and I was living in Paris trying to be a writer. And I happened upon his work, and I was immediately captivated by it. I felt that somehow it told me something true about my life and my behavior. I'd just gone through 4 turbulent years as an undergraduate at Yale. I was not Catholic or Christian. I was living a very secular life. And this book helped me to understand that the problems and the complications that I had experienced in my relationships were not just personal hangups. They were part of the universal human condition, and there were remedies.
Yeah, very interesting. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts of it, because I think there's two major ideas that I've taken from him in a short period that I learned about him. But one is called mimetic desire, and the other one is called scapegoating. But let's first start with the desire. Girard said we don't actually know what we want. We just copy what other people want. Can you explain this?
Well, I mean, I always think about, cows in a field sort of chewing on grass. I mean, cows know exactly what they want. They want to eat grass. And of course, human beings have instinctual tendencies too. There's certain things. If I'm in the middle of a desert and I haven't had any water to drink for a while, I don't need anybody else to tell me that I'm thirsty. But when it comes to most of the choices that we face in our lives, they are somehow more than instinctual. I may know that I want water, but do I know which brand of bottled water to choose when I'm in the 7-Eleven? And so we have this special openness that animals don't. In other words, we have this zone of freedom that allows us to grow and change, but it also means that there's something in us that's not quite fully defined. And so we're constantly looking to transform ourselves, somehow to grow beyond the state that we're in. And in order to do that, this is sort of Girard's great insight, we look to others. We look to others to see what the right path to follow might be. And of course, you use the phrase mimetic desire, which is the phrase that Girard uses. And it's a piece of jargon in a way, but it's very precise too. The word mimetic comes from the Greek for imitation, mimesis. And then desire, it's a French word in a way, because the concept of mimetic desire is translated from the French, désir, which has a slightly different connotation in the context of French philosophy than it does in English. When we hear the word desire, we might think that it has an erotic connotation. But although mimetic desire certainly plays a role in matters of love, really what desire means in this case is intentions and goals. So what Girard is saying when he uses the phrase mimetic desire and says we don't really know what to want, what he's really saying is that we're creatures who are aiming for transcendence. We want to transcend ourselves. We're looking to grow and change, and we are interested in adopting the goals and intentions of those who we think might be onto something, who might be further down the road in the direction of fullness and satisfaction and fulfillment than we are.
Yeah, would you say that's something like that I used to see in the workplace where I worked? A lot of the younger firefighters, once they got out probation, the first thing they wanted to do was buy a truck. That's what all young guys did. Or you see now today, there's a popularity with tattoos, and it seems like a lot of people just want to fit in. That's in a sense, the cool thing to do. Maybe even among parents, seeing bumper stickers like "My son goes to UCLA" or "My son goes to Notre Dame." Would you say that's kind of like this pack mentality or follow the leader?
Absolutely. So, but Girard's idea was always that we were looking for the being of somebody else. In other words, we wanted to be the guy who was charismatic, who was cool, who was popular, who seemed strong, who didn't seem afraid, who didn't seem insecure, who seemed to know what he wanted in life. And so the idea is that for Girard, the way you do that is to try to get the stuff that he has. That's
That's what I'm saying.
the
So,
first
like,
more naive, the first most naive step. If he's got the truck, you get the truck.
I
If he's
gotcha.
got cool
Yeah.
tattoos, you get the
Yeah.
tattoos.
Okay. So we just want to copy him in a sense to be like him.
That was Girard's hypothesis. Yeah, so he got this from classic literature. I mean, so it's like, yeah,
Would you say, I don't know if this is similar, but like Aristotle would say, if you really wanted to be good at something, you'd find somebody who was good at it. Is there some similarity there?
absolutely. I mean, Girard obviously wasn't the first person to talk about imitation, and he would often cite precisely Aristotle, who in the Poetics says that human beings can be distinguished from other animals in the fact that they are more imitative than other animals. We are animals, but we're rational animals, but we're also mimetic creatures, imitative creatures. And so, yes, it's absolutely. Aristotle would talk about how we learn by imitation. We learn language by imitation, and that's a great kind of imitation. It's unavoidable. If we want to learn how to do anything, we've got to find some model and learn from that person.
So some of that is good, but is he also warning us as well?
So I think, to say that it's good is very important as a first step, because I think a lot of Girard's readers have wondered, because he writes about violence and rivalry a lot, is he saying that this imitation is essentially bad? And he really is not. He's saying that imitation is good. It's what makes us open to transcendence. It's what makes us open to others. It's what makes it possible for us to grow and learn. And if we couldn't imitate, culture would disappear. But yes, there is a dark side of it. And I think, though he would occasionally use the language of Christian theology and talk about original sin, Girard didn't often use that language, but I think you could talk about the fallenness of imitation. Imitation is basically good, but we have a tendency to sort of be drawn to the flashiest people, the ones who are the coolest, but who maybe are not going to lead us in a direction that's ultimately good for us. So
So
there's a
would you
dark
say,
side to
like,
it.
so that would be important to surround yourself by good influence, read good books. Otherwise, you could go down the wrong road in a sense.
Precisely. I mean, you could say that, and again, Girard doesn't really address this question of the disciplining of desire. But everything he ever wrote implies that you have to do this. That if you want to be as happy as one can be in this life, and prepare yourself for happiness in the next, you need to make sure that you're surrounding yourself, just like you said, with the best influences. Girard did often talk about one kind of sort of more proximate model, which was the saints. He would say that the saints are great models because they're kind of are the intermediaries between the imitation of Christ and us. But we could extend that to mean any good role models or teachers, whether they're coming to us through the pages of a book or whether they're mentoring us and helping us to stay on the right track in our everyday lives.
Yeah, it would almost seem like it's like Aristotle's two extremes, and we find the mean, right? So we can look at maybe a very talented friend, however, maybe he has we copy the good but leave the bad. And maybe that's also a really important thing, to have a mentor and be surrounded by good people to keep you on the straight and narrow, because it seems like we could go either way at times.
Yeah, well, forgive me for since I do teach this stuff. Forgive me for getting a little bit theoretical, but I think that what you're saying is important, because for Girard there are really sort of two basic kinds of ways that this imitative tendency that he believed that human beings are endowed with could go. And one way tended to be very good, and he called that a kind of external imitation, where you're imitating people who are not really in your world, but who, in one way or another, probably model some virtue. Now, when you're a kid, you may want to walk around the house in your dad's shoes because you look up to him and you want to be like him. Or you may have a poster of Michael Jordan on your wall because you want to be like Mike. You may desire to wear those Air Jordans because you want to be a great basketball player. This is basically healthy imitation. Now, we assume that the models that you're imitating are basically salutary ones. But assuming that, if you do imitate those models, it's going to be good for you. They want what's best for you. They want you to grow and learn. They're going to help you along the path to being the best person you can be. But then there's another kind of imitation that Girard was very interested in. My tendency is to talk about this stuff at a very high theoretical level, and that was Girard's tendency too. He was a literary critic, first of all, and he liked to discuss a lot of these things in the context of literature. But it's very easy to discuss it. As you know, your examples are great. The example of the truck or the guy who gets a tattoo because that's what everybody else is doing. It's very easy to discuss this stuff in the context of ordinary life. Think about, for example, freshman year of college. This is an example that my friend Luke Burgess, who wrote a wonderful book on Girard called Wanting, often uses. In freshman year of college, you arrive in this new place. You have no idea what the rules are. You're trying to choose your classes, your major. You're trying to fit in with the crowd. And maybe you've got a roommate who's really cool. And you think, well, this guy seems to know what he wants. He seems to understand what to do. I'll just sort of try to be like him. I'll follow him. Now, that's good. Maybe up to a certain point. Maybe you develop a friendship because you have similar tastes. You like the same music, the same movies, the same books, and so forth. But in this situation, this guy occupies the same space you do, quite literally physically, but also in the sense that his sphere of possibilities is the same as yours. And so if you end up wanting the same thing that he does, you're going to become competitors. So if he decides he wants to date a certain girl, and because you're copying all of his intentions and goals, you might catch that desire, this sort of like you would a cold. Suddenly, the two of you are at odds. And so Girard felt that naturally you're going to be involved in close relationships with your peers, but what you want to avoid is modeling your goals and intentions and desires on the people closest to you, because there's a structural tendency for that to turn ugly.
Yeah, I could see what you're saying is, so you basically got to maybe stop and examine yourself and give some thought. Like, what would you recommend? I mean, you've studied this man for a while. What would you recommend to a young man that, let's say he's in the military, he shares close quarters with other guys like this, or he's on a basketball team, or in the workplace? What would you offer advice not to get sucked into that vortex?
Well, I think what you said earlier is really the key. You've got to surround yourself with good models in one way or another. Now, it could be that you have regular good habits of doing things like getting up early, and it could be maybe you go to church. Maybe you have some trusted older friends who are confidants whom you can consult when you're in some kind of a moral quandary, and who can give you some pointers. And if you can meet with this person on a regular basis, that can be very helpful. Maybe that person even recommends some books to you that he thinks will be good influences on you. And so the key point for Girard is that it's not like you can just flip a switch and stop imitating, and then you'll be safe from all this stuff. We're always going to be growing in one direction or the other. We're always going to be trying to become somebody else, somebody better than the person we are, hopefully. And so the question is, which direction are we going in? And if we could keep contact with some good, strong models who are leading us in the right direction, I think that gives us the best chance possible to resist these other temptations.
Yeah, that just what you just brought up there reminds me of when my oldest son went off to college, and fortunately, we had a very good support group around us. And I remember a priest recommended that he go. Of the choices that he had, Notre Dame was one, and the reason he pointed in there because there was a group of really good men off campus, and that would connect well with him. Because I think we all know that sometimes when people go off to college, they become secular. Maybe they were practicing their faith, and now they no longer are. And that's because everybody wants to fit in, go along to get along. So I think that's like really good advice to like put yourself in an ecosystem or environment where you have good support. And I think also mentorship. Um, Maybe an older gentleman or a little bit somebody older than you can help you. Maybe somebody you meet with regularly to help you, because I think this is I was listening to a young man on a podcast earlier, and he was just saying that when he was in college, uh, had it not been for him stumbling on Girard, he could have gotten in trouble. And like you said, it's just not a switch you can throw. It's something you got to constantly keep monitoring and asking yourself, am I going down the right road? Can you speak to his second idea that at least that I would like to speak about today is scapegoat?
Absolutely, the scapegoat. In fact, this is the idea that I think pops into most people's minds when, if they've heard of René Girard, they think, okay, he's got something to say about violence and the scapegoat. And that's true. I mean, this is sort of the way the mimetic desire idea cashes out. Because for Girard, the tendency that we have to mimetic desire, it's a source of social tensions, sort of inevitably. And he was very interested in archaic or primitive or pagan culture. And in a pagan culture, you don't have a police force or a system of courts with judges to keep the peace. You have religious ritual. And the question is, where does this religious ritual come from and what is its purpose? And Girard's idea was, well, this mimetic desire thing, it is going to cause tensions. And how does a community deal with it? Well, maybe the community doesn't deal with it. And maybe it just leads to all kinds of fighting and conflict, and eventually the community tears itself apart. But there's another possibility, which is that you find an outlet for these tensions. And Girard's hypothesis was that somehow uh, every community was built on scapegoating. So you would sort of offload the community's tensions onto this one person. And the reason that works is that, especially if you choose somebody who's an outsider, a little bit marginal, uh, maybe doesn't have a lot of connections in the group, then the violence gets offloaded onto this person and it can't rebound back into the group. You've eliminated it. Now, this is very dark in a way, right? But if you think about it, we do this kind of thing all the time. When two friends meet, the number one tempting topic of conversation is a third friend who isn't there. And it's an easy way to be close to somebody else, is to gang up on an absent person. And the reason it works so well, in a sense, is that that person can't defend himself. He doesn't even know he's being ragged on or gossiped about. And so you could pretty much do this with impunity. Now, this is one of the things we have to teach our kids not to do. But it certainly is a human temptation. And Girard thought that this was somehow central to the way that human beings deal with their interpersonal conflicts. Now, in office politics, this is a famous sort of scenario, right? The people gossiping around the water cooler about the unpopular boss. And we've certainly all witnessed it in our own lives in various settings. The friend who gets blamed, maybe quite unfairly, or who gets excluded from a clique, and so forth.
Trevor, would you also say that might apply to like online canceling, or like we've seen this of late in the last few years? If maybe somebody says something that's unpopular or maybe makes a mistake and it almost seems like the mob jumps on them and kind of like,
Gleefully. Yeah, gleefully jumps on him. Gleefully jumps on him. Absolutely. I mean, do you remember the famous example of this? And it's sort of, in a sense, the beginning of what we call cancel culture. I think it was in 2013. There was a young woman named Justine Sacco who was about to climb on a plane, I think for Africa, maybe South
yeah.
Africa, and she
Mhm.
made a very distasteful joke on Twitter. I mean, it was distasteful, but I mean, it was just it was in poor taste. And then she hits send tweet and she turns off her phone and she gets on the plane. And when she gets off the plane and turns on her phone at her destination, her entire life has been turned upside down. She's lost her job. She's an infamous celebrity worldwide. This was sort of the beginning of cancel culture. Now, why did this happen? Yeah, it seemed like the internet became a place where we could offload some of our social tensions, find an outlet for them in a way that was somewhat safe for us. It certainly had repercussions for the victims of this stuff in real life. But because you didn't have to see the person and really see their face or really come to grips with what was happening to them, it was pretty easy for people to laugh and retweet and write all kinds of nasty things online. Now, I think in recent years, we've seen uh, certainly we live in a very fragmented republic right now, but we've seen that fragmentation mirrored, or maybe in a sense, the mirroring online is feeding into the real life fragmentation in the way that our social networks have become more siloed. So you've got, the more conservative people are on X, the writers all went to Substack, the left-wing people went to Blue Sky, the teenagers are on TikTok and Instagram, and who knows what other social network I've never even heard of before. But what that means is that you've got sort of these self-contained bubbles. And I think maybe um, cancel culture just doesn't manifest itself quite as frequently in the current internet landscape as it once did. But absolutely, a stellar and quite uh, disturbing example of what Girard was talking about when he talked about the scapegoat.
What about a young professional man stuck in a toxic, like ultra competitive workplace, like the fire department or the police department or on an athletic team? What would Girard say in regards to that?
There's an interesting book called Clever as Serpents. I hope it goes beyond that and also includes, gentle as doves, but at least maybe just clever as serpents. And it's by these two sort of business gurus who apply Girard's ideas to management and office politics. It's quite interesting. And the first part of the book is theoretical, and the second one is more practical. And they do give some advice about this. Now, do I think it's all ironclad? I'm not sure, but I think a few of the tips are quite worthwhile. One of them, as I recall, is don't blame people who are further down the chain than you are. Take the blame as a manager for mistakes that the people you're managing might make. Another one I think was don't be a glory hog. Make yourself indispensable, work really well, but don't try to take credit, especially don't try to take credit at other people's expense. Because that's just going to make your life difficult. And then a third one that I thought was very, very pertinent is just the idea that credit and blame are the currency of office politics. And so if you can stop indulging in gossip, you have extracted yourself from 99% of the political games that are happening in your place of work. And that'll probably give you a certain freedom that you wouldn't otherwise have. Now, there's some other principles there too. And, I'm sure you have some tips, having spent a long career in the fire department, observing this stuff, and then moreover, having to deal with it and manage it, which gives you some interesting perspective. I'd be curious to hear if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, well, I was listening to Peter Thiel the other day in your documentary, and he talked about the importance of leadership on how Girard helped him become a better leader. And just some of the points that you made. So, like, not taking all the credit, like you said, acknowledging people when they do. And then something we call a correction. Sometimes you have to make a correction in private. We used to always say praise in public and correct in private. So I think that's really some sound advice because that's what they're going to deal with, especially men that work with other men in close contact with them. Since you're a professor and, you have a very good resume as far as your educational background, how can a guy figure out what he really wants as a major and is just not chasing a prestigious college just because of his peers?
Well, I'm almost laughing as you ask that question because I think I chose my major precisely because I had a bunch of friends who were choosing the same major. So I may be the wrong person to ask this question. I also sort of wonder, uh, there's probably you talk to your dad, you talk to your family, you talk to talk to people you trust, trusted advisors when you're trying to make an important decision like that. I do think there's a good argument for people who think that no matter what kind of education you're going to get, at some point, maybe in the first year of college or the first 2 years of college, you should be exposed to the liberal arts. In other words, you should be reading the great works of philosophy and reflecting on what it means to be human and what the goal of being human is, and trying to come to terms with some of these bigger questions so that when it comes time to forge a path for yourself in life, you have some of the philosophical tools that can help you to do that. And, does everybody have to read Aristotle and Plato? Well, no, but but if you are going to go to college and you are going to choose a major, why not try to expose yourself to some of these great thinkers, these great figures who can equip you with some really good insights into what the purpose of life is and how to achieve happiness. If you read Aristotle's Ethics, there's so many valuable things in there. I wish I'd been exposed to Aristotle when I was in college.
Yeah, the term that comes to mind is technically competent barbarian. Some people are only concerned about acquiring knowledge or certification so they could go out and make money, but like forgetting like, hey, where am I going? We used to say this on the fire department. It's nice that you can put up a ladder, but put it in the right place. That's where the skill comes. So it's nice that maybe you're really good at your major or whatever, but like, what are you going to do with that? Like, what's your
Yeah.
purpose in life? Where are you going? So I think that's a really good point there.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true that if you're not equipped to understand the big picture, a lot of these little choices are going to seem a lot more puzzling. and they're going to induce a lot more anguish. Just to your point about what was the phrase you used? The technically competent barbarian? Well, I was just talking with somebody who was involved in the world of entrepreneurship, and he said he was talking to a very young entrepreneur who was incredibly successful. He'd founded a company that was just off the chart successful, lots and lots of investment, a very high valuation. But the kid admitted to him, I'm, maybe he's even a billionaire, a multimillionaire on paper, but I don't know how to run a board meeting. So it's just and it wasn't just that somebody could have explained to him how to run a board meeting and that would have solved all his problems. What he was really saying, I think, was, I, I, I'm not fully a mature human being yet, even though I've achieved all this success.
Yeah, what that brings to mind to me is like sometimes you see some of these young athletes that graduate college and move into professional sports, and they're given a boatload of money. I remember there was a football player, and he was like an All-American, played a national championship team. And as soon as he landed in the NFL, he got all this money, but in a very short period of time, he could not manage his money. And then after a few years, he got an injury, and then he was out of luck. And it's almost like it wasn't put on board into him how to manage and navigate life's choices. And I think that's something that's a young man needs to think about, really think about, because you could be blessed with all the talent in the world, but if you're not wise or you're not been counseled by good men, you're going to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, as a late bloomer myself and a Catholic convert in my late 30s, I would say the sooner the better. Oh.
Yeah. How would you say like constantly trying to impress others could ruin a young man's relationship with others, as Girard would say to us?
In connection with Girard and just sort of how you navigate the dynamics that he talks about in your life, I love this book by this priest, Father Robert Spitzer, called Finding True Happiness. And he has this very interesting model of different kinds of desires, which immediately, I saw this, I thought, well, this is somehow compatible with what Girard is doing. So on the lowest level, it's just like, basic gratification. All I want to do is sort of sit in front of the TV and eat some ice cream and watch a good TV show. That's sort of level one. Level two is comparative advantage. I'm looking for comparative advantage in my life. I just want to get ahead. I'm trying to gratify my ego. That's the second level. And he says most people are stuck there. We're looking for comparative advantage over the people around us. And we want to be able to tell ourselves, I got more likes on my tweet than that guy did, or, I make more money than that guy does, or, I manage more people than my colleague over there. That loser only manages 15 people. I manage 16. And he says, this is how you get into your own personal hell. It's going to make you very, very unhappy if that's the kind of desire, if that's sort of how you're viewing the world and viewing other people as people to be defeated, as people that you're comparing yourself to. And so he said, the thing you have to do is kind of aim for these higher levels of desire. And the third level of desire is just when, instead of looking at other people and feeling threatened or feeling competitive, so how can I contribute to my workplace? How can I contribute to my family? How can I contribute maybe to my local politics, get involved there, civic life? He says that's already, when you start to think about life that way, it's going to be tremendously liberating for you. And you're going to find that you can leave this personal hell that you've constructed for yourself. And then the fourth level is a transcendent desire, where you sort of see yourself as part of this big, almost romance or adventure, where you're really participating in a much higher set of priorities and your goals are much vaster. So I love that model. And I think somehow what Girard does so well is elucidate the mechanisms that make that level two sort of ego gratifying desire level so hellish. And then he also talks about the need for personal conversion and self-examination and self-mastery and virtue building and all those things. And I think those are the things that get us out of that and can push us into these higher, more fulfilling ways of looking at other human beings and looking at our lives.
As we wrap up, you've studied René Girard, and then we mentioned Aristotle. As we close, what advice would you give to a young man in studying like these great thinkers on how important that is? Because I think a lot of times, once people die, we kind of forget them, and we're only dealing with people that are alive. Can you speak to the importance of like letting, in a sense, the dead vote in your life, giving them an opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah, great expression. The democracy of the dead. Yeah, letting the dead vote in your life. I love that. Well, I don't know that I can say anything that is going to, electrify some young man and make him want to go to the library and check out Aristotle or go online. But all I could say is that when I discovered Aristotle's Ethics, not until my 30s, I thought, who has been hiding this from me all my life? Uh, Here's Aristotle saying, what is the nature of human desire? Well, we always want a good of some kind. We may be mistaken about whether it's good for us, but whatever we're doing, we're always aiming for something. He says, well, but all of those things we're aiming for are just in view of some other higher thing. And eventually, at the end of the chain, there has to be some highest thing that we're all going for. What is that? And he considers a number of possibilities. He ends up saying, well, the thing that we all want is happiness. And then he goes on to explain how attempting to discipline yourself and achieve good habits and virtue is the path to doing that. If you want to be a great pianist, you have to practice. If you want to live a good life, you have to practice too. And it's so valuable. And Aristotle is not a dusty old thinker from thousands of years ago. He's absolutely vital and alive today. And very well worth engaging with. You don't have to read the Nicomachean Ethics from cover to cover. As sort of lecture notes more than anything else. There are also plenty of good books that can help you to prepare for an engagement with Aristotle, or even sort of give you the gist of what he's saying in a way that's clear and relevant to you. Very valuable. I think of Edith Hall's Aristotle's Way. I mean, that's maybe not even a very good one, but it's just one that comes to mind. But it gives you the gist.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Trevor, for your time and your words of wisdom. Thank you for joining us in the Forge today. Discernment isn't a one-time event. It's a daily yes to God's providence. As you navigate your professional growth this week, pray for the courage to follow where he leads. May Mary, Mother of fairest love, be your guide and your protector in the midst of the world. Again, thank you, Professor Trevor. It's been a pleasure having you today.
Thanks very much, Paul. I've enjoyed it tremendously.